Before we start, I would like to remind you that we have a dedicated webpage for the 7th MoU conference. You can visit it through the link in the chat box. It contains a feedback sheet that we would appreciate if you fill it out. Leveraging language technologies and machine translation, the new profile of professional translators, is the first item on today's agenda. Cecilia Elizalde, Director of Conference Services at the United Nations headquarters in New York, and Natalia Bondono, Senior Spanish Revisor and Project Manager at headquarters, will tell us about the impact of new language technologies on the profile of professional translators. Cecilia and Natalia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon. Thanks for inviting us to make this presentation. I'm going to share my screen. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So the purpose of this presentation here in the MoU conference is to reflect about the profile of the future professional translators at the United Nations, given the impact of new technologies today, and especially neural machine translation. So what we would like to do today is to engage with the MoU universities in this reflection and to review the evolution of the translations at the UN, how the profile of the translators have changed over the years, and also to give you an overview of how translators work today so that you can contribute to this reflection and helping us in this process. So translation technologies at the UN have been since the beginning of the organizations, of course, according to each time and age. So this has been a constant evolution of the working methods due to technological advances. Recently, at the UN, member states changed the workload standards, so we engage in a very thorough review of the history of the translation at the UN, the translation services at the UN, and we have realized that, translators have been, changing the way they work in many times, in many points in time. So recently what we have seen is that there has been a complete shift from paper-based to electronic workflows. Shifts in how the staff who support the translators work. Shifts, for instance, on moving from a model of two levels, from translation and revision to complete self-revision. Shift on how translators, what is the knowledge that we expect from our new recruits, and how we train the new recruits to become full-fledged translators. You know that we have new examinations now, and as I said recently, the General Assembly changed the workload standards of the translators and increased them. And in this context, translators have been at the forefront of this change and trying to innovate and to adjust to the times. So very briefly in this introduction, I wanted to share with you my background and the background of Natalia so that you understand where we come from. So I was a freelance translator. I am a graduate of the Universidad de la República in Uruguay, a sworn translator, and I became a UN translator in 2003. And I started working in IT projects related to language technologies. I became the project manager of GText, which is our umbrella project for all language technologies for translators. Then I became the chief of the Spanish service, and now I'm the director of the documentation division, which is all the translation services in New York, about 350 translators. And I am the executive of, now I was the project manager, and I'm the executive of GText, GDoc, which is our workflow management system, that is another product. And I'm also the executive of our knowledge management systems that are Spot and Athena. And probably you have heard about them in other presentations. And regarding Natalia, you can see that she was also a sworn translator, and then a court interpreter, became translator at the UN, and then became later involved in translation projects, in IT translation projects, as the senior reviser project manager of GText. So we have been thinking for a while, having been so involved in technologies, in language technologies, and seeing, what language technologies can do, especially now that neural machine translation is so good. What is the new profile that we need for UN translators? And this is the question that we would like the MoU universities to help us answer, brainstorm. Is not an easy question. It's a difficult one. It's, like having the crystal ball and looking into the future. But it is a very relevant one, because machine translation has completely changed the way translators work, and we need to reflect if the education that we need to have from the new recruits is the same, or if we need to adjust. So as I said, over the years, in the past 30 years, the changes in technology have accelerated considerably, especially in the area of language technologies. I remember very clearly the class when I was a student, a translation student in Uruguay, where the teacher said that we will not see machine translation in our lifespan. And actually, it was pretty soon in 2006 with the progress of statistical machine translation and Google Translate, which was trained on UN documents. We saw that actually machine translation was here, and it is here to stay. So in terms of machine translation, it is not perfect, but it can only improve from this point. So this is what we need, why we need to be prepared. So as you can see in the slide, personal computers change the way translators work. Then we used to start, at the beginning, we used to start with a blank page and our paper dictionaries. Now, we have all a set of tools that can help us. The internet also had like a huge impact on research, indexation technologies. We used to use DT search, now we use Illuna search. Are essential for translators to look for information. The introduction of computer-assisted translation was huge in around the 2000s to start in this to facilitate the work of translators. And as I said, the introduction of statistical machine translation and now neural machine translation are big points in the history of translators. Today at the UN, the translators use simultaneously CAT, neural machine translation, and other digital technologies provided in the context of this GText program. And especially, they are all together, they come all together in a product that we call Illuna, Electronic Languages of the United Nations, that Natalia is going to talk about. So over the years, at the beginning, translators used to dictate their translators to a typist. Then translators changed the way they work and started keyboarding, typing their own translations in their personal computers and using, as I said, indexes to look for information. Then we started using Trados and now Illuna. And then computer-assisted translation with machine translation embedded, which is the situation that we have now. I know that you have talked during this conference about TAPTA for UN. We are not using any more TAPTA for UN. Now we are using commercial tools that are integrated in Iluna. Natalia will speak about that. And this is the model for different languages. We have different machine translation systems that work better for each language. And in this process of changing the way translators input the translations in, and provide the translations, we have seen a decrease in the reliance on support staff, which means that the translator needs to become better at doing his or her own support, and also a decrease on the revision, which means that translators are becoming better at becoming self-revisers, are becoming better at providing translations independently. So they need less support, they can be more autonomous, and they can reach faster the excellence that we need them to achieve. So in this context, we need to reflect, what is the future of the UN translators? Is moving to what is called post-editing or what we call augmented translation. In the translation industry today, we are seeing a commodification of translation. There is a huge need for translation. But translation is becoming less of a craft and art, which was, when I was a student, it was exactly that. And it's becoming a product, okay? The cost of translation has dropped. The demand has increased, but the cost has dropped because we have new technologies that accelerate the process of translating. But not only accelerate, and this is where the threat comes, is the new technologies not only accelerate the process of translation, but also allow new players to become, part of the translation industry. We are seeing today, in the best cases, subject matter specialists, for instance, lawyers, that are post-editors of machine translation outputs regarding legal topics. And in some other cases, we don't even have a subject matter. There are educated readers who are just take the output of machine translation and just, post-edit it. So this is where, we need to start thinking, what kind of translator, we need in the United Nations. And most certainly, we don't really need these new players. We need to come up with something better. At the UN, we have very high quality requirements in translation, but at the same time, the General Assembly is asking us to produce more because they are aware that technologies are accelerating the process of translation. We have an in-house developed suite of integrated tools adapted to our needs, which are very particular because we translate United Nations parliamentary documentation. It's not any kind of translation. It's a translation that is based on precedents. It has certain techniques that we need, vocabulary, terminology that we need to respect, but also a certain life cycle that we need to be aware. And because the United Nations covers so many topics, it requires a huge deal of substantive knowledge from the translators to be able to translate high quality documents faster and to provide the services that the member states need. What we also see today is that we have shifted to what we call a diamond shape structure, where most of the translators are self-revisers. In the past, it used to take 4 or 5 years for a new translator to become a full-fledged self-reviser. Now we are achieving this in 2 years because of technology, because the way that we are changing the way we train colleagues, but also because of the quality, the caliber of the new recruits that we are getting, including from the universities in our MoU network. So all of this is contributing to for translators to becoming self-revisers much faster, and the goal for the expectation for new recruits is that in 2 years, during what we call the probationary period after the examination, a translator needs to become a self-reviser, because now this is possible, this is achievable, thanks to the new training, the technology, and the education of our colleagues. So if we reflect about the future, about which profile we need for translators, we need to rethink about is the focus on linguistic and styles is needed exactly the same or not. You know, it used to take a lot of time for translators to adopt the UN style. But now, because of machine translation, is speaking, you know, in UNs, it is this can get much faster. But we really need to develop the substantive knowledge of colleagues in these huge substantive areas that we have, the diversity of topic. Research techniques are a must. Translators need to become like very good researchers. Technological awareness is always important, but less important because the tools have become easier. You know that in the past, learning how to use a computer-assisted translation system used to take like a week. Now with the Luna, you are good in half an hour. So technological awareness is something that we need to rethink. Do we really need to have so much focus on how to use the technology, on understanding the technology, or how to use it? And then this is, I think, the most important part is that how we can achieve high quality translation using neural machine translation and not use doing the post editing, which is post editing is like you take the machine translation output and you just correct it quickly. What we are thinking is that, and what we do at the United Nations, we don't talk about post-editing. We talk about review of machine output. And this is because it's a process that, because of the quality requirements, of the diversity of topics, of the life cycles of the documentations, it is much more adapted to our own operations. Of course, we need consistency. This is extremely important, and we have new tools to help us, but we also need to have colleagues who understand where we need to be consistent and where we should not be consistent. And of course, working in such a large teams, you know, we have each team of translators has about 60 translators, 350 all in all in the division. So communication and teamwork are extremely important. But also how to use shared resources. In the past, you know, translators used to hoard their own terminology, glossaries, etc. Now, you know, everything is shared and used by the full teams. So we think that the future profile of the UN translators, and this is open to the debate and to your feedback, is that we will need digitally fluent translators specialized in UN subject matters who can work as expert reviewers in an augmented translation environment supported by integrated systems and artificial intelligence. And now I would like to give the floor to Natalia to show you how translators work. And then you start thinking about your questions and your interventions. And I will be extremely happy to hear your reactions and your ideas. Thank you. Natalia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Cecilia. Good morning, good afternoon, colleagues. As Cecilia mentioned, I am going to speak a bit about the tools that we're using. We developed the tools in-house, and the tools are aimed at satisfying the requirements of UN translators. The philosophy behind them is simplicity. So the idea is that we provide a user-friendly interface where colleagues can learn to use the tool in less than an hour. The tools are web-based, so we don't need to install any application. We don't need to create memory packages like in the past. Everything is integrated, and we share the tools globally. The tools are used in the 4 duty stations, in the regional commissions, and increasingly in UN agencies. They're used right now in IMO, WHO, WMO, and UNESCO. What you see on the screen is our main tool, Iluna. Perhaps you have had the chance to see it in the past. This is our CAT tool, our computer-assisted translation tool. And as you can see in the screen, it's quite a simple interface. similar to other CAT tools with a source and target format. And the idea behind it, as I said before, is to have a sort of one-stop shop. We have every resource available there so that translators don't need to go from one place to the next to find what they need. What are the main functions that the tool has? There are some functions that are quite specifically to the UN documents. For example, the detection of our symbols. You know that all our documentation is symbol-based, and this is quite important for us to retrieve references, but also to understand the chronology of the events, for example, from the evolution of a topic in the different documents. And this is one of the, let's say, customized elements for UN translators. Of course, the tool offers the detection of recycled text. It searches in our repository. We have a repository of all documents that are issued by the United Nations that perhaps you have seen in other systems like the Official Document Repository, ODS. These documents are all final documents, so we don't have what you would call a translation memory. It's simply a repository that is automatically fed by every file that we publish in the 6 official languages. We also have terminology detection, and I will talk about this a bit more later. And we have the possibility of searching for text within the interface itself. We have a text research option, we have a find and replace, and other functions available. So as I mentioned before, the key, I think, in my view, is this integration of having everything in one place. One of the most important integrated features is terminology. You probably know that we have quite a big repository of terminology. It's called UN Term. This is a portal that is available online, and it's available to the general public as well. And we have over 500,000 records in the 6 official languages. And this portal, UN Term, is directly connected to Iluna. So whenever we have to translate a document and we upload it to Iluna, Iluna goes to this terminology database and will look for all the terminology that is present in my document. It will display it for me in the interface by highlighting in green every instance found. And this highlighted text will be also hyperlinked to the record. So directly from Iluna, I can see the full record in UN Term. And we also share the database with different organizations. And this proved to be very important and quite useful during the COVID-19 pandemic, because one of the organizations that joined recently to the UN Term portal is WHO. And by them joining the portal, we were able to get the most accurate terminology for COVID-19. And this terminology was shared across all the duty station, regional commissions, and agencies that were using UN terms, so we could see this terminology and in real time as it was being coined in Iluna, and at the same time it was being made available to the public through the public version of the UN term portal. The next element that is the subject of this presentation that is integrated into the CAT tool is a machine translation. So like Cecilia mentioned before, the idea of machine translation is that it is another tool that helps us produce a high quality product rather than the main tool itself in a post-editing context. So what we do is integrate machine translation engines into Iluna. For a very long time, we had a statistical machine translation, TAPTA4UN. This was an engine that was developed in collaboration with WIPO. And as a neural machine translation began to improve, we began testing the different engines that were available in the market. So now what we do is we periodically test neural machine translation engines, and we select engines, commercial engines, based on the scores by target language. So we don't have a single engine for all the languages. We use the best engine that we can find for each target language. The evaluation of the engines is human, and we have a 1 to 5 score, and based on this score is that we select the engine for each language. How do we integrate it into Iluna? It is enabled by default. So when I am working in Iluna, if Iluna finds the text that I need in a previously published document, it will offer it to me as a suggestion. But if nothing is found in the repository, it's a new sentence, something that we never translated before, by default, it will offer me machine translation. However, because we understand that machine translation might not always be useful depending on the type of document, I have the possibility of also turning off machine translation. And I can call machine translation for a specific sentence if I want to. So it is a setting that is decided by the user. What we plan to do in the future is to continue evaluating new engines. We see that now there are many other engines that have added features, and it is not possible right now to bring all the features into the integrated environment through an API, but we see that there is an evolution, and we expect that this would be possible soon, and we will be able to always offer the best quality based on blind testings to translators on the interface. The next item that we have integrated, and this is, I would say, one of the most recent ones, is quality assurance. And this is also a feature that we look to expand, and that complements quite well machine translation, I believe. The feature right now includes different types of checks. So it checks for errors in dates, in numbers, in symbols. It also checks for consistency to ensure that I translated sentences the same way within the same document. Again, it is connected to the terminology portal UN-Term, so it also checks for consistency between my translations and the translations in the terminology records. If my translation doesn't match the title of an organization that is in a UN-Term record, then the system will alert me, and I make the final decision, of course, of what is the version that will be used. It also has a connection to the official country name records that are stored in UN-Term, which are also available to all of you, and that are available also in a downloadable format. And this ensures not only that we don't miss a country name or that we don't misspell it, but also that we follow the editorial rules for country names, because we have a long and short form. So with this quality assurance, the goal is that we look for errors. We can also start programming certain style that we have, which in part also comes from machine translation, as Cecilia mentioned. We have, for example, added recently the spelling list that is used in the editorial section. And in this way, we can complement machine translation with quality checks to make sure that we are consistent in the UN style. If you want to know more about the tool, although it is not available publicly, you can see the videos that we have in YouTube. We have quite a lot of videos that are very short and easy to follow. I think that we have 1 minute and a half, 2 minutes and a half videos focusing on each feature. And this can give you a better idea of the different functions available and how we work with the tool. Thank you.
Thank you, Cecilia and Natalia, for this wealth of information and for the comprehensive overview of eLuna. I now open the floor for discussion. You can ask your questions in the chat box, and those who would like us to open the mic for them can raise their hands.
I think that we have some questions in the chat.
Yep. So let me read them loudly. We have a question from Hannah Martikainen, from Egypt. Thank you very much for this presentation of the United Nations translation workflow. I lost it, just 1 second. Okay. You mentioned you have moved from TAPTA for UN to commercial engines integrated via API to eLuna. Are you at liberty to tell us which commercial machine translation engine? Hold on.
Yeah, which one we are using? Yes. Yes, we can tell you what we are using now. We are in the middle of a procurement process, so we cannot say anything about the procurement process. But what we are using right now, I think Natalia can brief us on that. Natalia.
Yes, we are using DeepL for English, Spanish, Russian, French, and German. We are using MS Translate from Microsoft for Arabic, and we are using Tencent for Chinese.
But we are in the process of evaluating other tools, as I said. So, I think that in the next couple of months we will have other tools. Hello.
I'll read the second question. It's from Sabella Abion, United Nations Headquarters, STS. I think it's important to insist on the fact that post-editing is another element of our work and not an output per se. That's a major difference between the United Nations and the private sector.
Absolutely, exactly. This is why we don't even talk about post-editing. We talk about use of machine translation integrated in our workflow in eLuna, in our main computer-assisted translation tool. We talk about augmented translation, where the translator is at the center of the, of this huge suite of tools, deciding which one to use. But we don't do post-editing. We use machine translation as another element, with automatic terminology recognition, as Natalia showed, with the hyperlinks highlighted, because translating for the United Nations requires a great deal of research. I would say that in terms of style, we used to insist a lot about style, but I think that this part, the machine has helped a lot, and the machine translation component in particular has helped a lot. But everything related to research and understanding the documents in difficult contexts, in complex specializations is still a must. And this is, I think, the main, I would say, skill that we need to continue promoting, especially after people understand the languages, of course. The ability to research is very important. But yes, Isabella, we don't even say post-editing. We don't do post-editing. We use machine translation in this augmented translation setup that we have through eLuna.
Another question from Josefat Chitonga. Thank you very much for the presentation. Do we have a superior CAT on the market?
If we have a superior, do we have a superior? Yeah, I mean, Iluna. I think that for the United Nations, Iluna is the superior computer-assisted translation system, because it was developed by translators like myself, like Natalia, by Isabella also, who was participating in the project very actively. And in this context, the fact that other organizations are embracing Iluna, they are the main problem that we have now is that we have so many organizations of the UN system who want to adopt Iluna. But we follow the market on what is going on in the market in terms of computer-assisted translation, but for our own needs, Iluna is, I would say, the tool to go.
Okay. Another question. Have we explored interactive adaptive machine translation at the United Nations, example, LILT or modern MT?
Not yet, but Natalia, but we have plans for that. Natalia can explain, a little bit what are our process in this regard. Natalia?
Yes, this is part of the plan. We started, I would say, with the testings of the commercial engines as is, and then we started seeing the evolution, the possibility of training the engines, and then the adapted machine translation. So this would be our next step, to see the new generation of engines that can learn from the changes that we made to the text, and see if these are a good fit for us. So we definitely plan to test them.
Good. Another question from Gina Saad, Université Saint-Joseph. Would the UN consider training the trainers so they can, in their turn, better help their students to meet the new UN translation profile?
Yes, we have been thinking about that, and at some point, I think that we we were about to develop a toolkit for that. I think that this is a great idea to continue exploring it, because it will make a difference. So I think that I would like to have the focal points with the universities thinking about this. Thank you.
I have a question here as well. What do you expect new translators to know? Which tools, skills are they meant to master from day one? Interesting.
I think that in terms of tools, we don't really expect them to particular tool, because as I said, we can train them to use Iluna very quick, but they need to know a tool before coming to the UN. I think that it is very important today. You cannot be today a translator and not knowing how computer-assisted translation works. You need to know one tool, any of the tools, so that you have at least the general idea of working in segments, having automatic terminology recognition, knowing what is a translation memory. Even if we don't have technically translation memories, we have bytext. It's more or less the same in our repository. So I would say that from the perspective of the university, translators should know, students should know how to use any tool for computer-assisted translation. And then after they are successful in the examinations and we hire them, we will train them. Thank you.
Thank you. My colleague Nidal would like to ask the last question. Nidal, go ahead.
Hello. Thank you so much, Cecilia, for this comprehensive, and Natalia for this presentation. I'm a translator by education, by practice, and also by passion. I use this tool and I like it. I'm not promoting it, but I used it. I know what it can do in terms of saving, in terms of consistency. Let me also mention that the accessibility, it's a very nice feature in it. But I would like to ask a question. How much do we still give to creativity in translation? This is the first question. Second, what shall we answer a client who comes and says to us, colleagues, this is a machine translation. I don't accept it.
Yeah. Okay. The creativity first. I think that this is one of the. This is a good question, Nidal, because this is one of the main problems. As I said, we used to start with a blank page and our dictionaries, but mostly relying on our knowledge and, craft and art and working and reworking the sentences. And today we start either with a sentence that was translated by another colleague in the past, or a machine translation sentence. And of course, that means that we are, working into the boundaries of what we get in the screen. So yes, it is a problem, Nidal. I think that the use of all these tools makes our profession way more technical. I think that we still need the creativity and the linguistic fluency, and everybody in translation is a writer. This is something that we need to keep, but it is becoming more difficult. I remember when I was a translator and I was already using machine translation, because we have been using machine translation for a very long time. Sometimes, in some texts, you just don't want the machine translation because it will give you, like a translation that is not as, fluent as you would like. For instance, a speech of the Secretary General, where the tone, the I would say the urgency of the matter and emotional, I would say, charge is important to convey. And the second one, if a client complains that something is a machine translation, I think, clients complain about so many things that you can explain them that no, it is not a machine translation. It's just what we could do based on your original.
Thank you.
It seems Nidal's question wasn't the last one. We have another one from Hassan Harafa. Neural machine translation is primarily anchored. This is a question to Cecilia, excuse me. Neural machine translation is primarily anchored and promoted in commercial circles like Amazon, Facebook, etc., to reach the market the fastest. Aren't you afraid that after a while, the whole process of translation will turn into Fordism model, a highly artificial corpus erasing the very nature of the United Nations highly political leverage language?
Hi, Hassan. Thank you very much for the question. Machine translation is part of how translators work at the UN, and it's not recent. It has been here for a very long time. And machine translation, it has been fed, especially statistical machine translation, relied a lot on the corpus. Neural machine translation relies on less bigger corpus and can do a lot more. But I think it is, we are not talking about post-editing at the UN. We are talking about having very good, high-quality translators who can take the support of machine translation when they need it, and then they will and then they will add their input and the knowledge. We have I do believe that we are the best translators in the parliamentary documentation world, and that I don't think that we are going to produce bad quality translations that are going to ruin the machine translation, especially because now the machine translation is less and less dependent on the artificial, on what you call the artificial corpus. But it's a very interesting, I think, and this is the focus of this conversation, is our profession has changed and is not going back. So how do we fit in this new context? And we continue providing, like in this niche that we have now, that it is shorter than in the past, how we continue providing our services, how we continue staying relevant, which I think that we will continue doing it. And one of the things that I find that is great about translation is that translation, is not immediate, that you have a time to think, to create, to add your input. So the machine is not replacing us. It will not replace us. It will make our job easier. In some cases, as Nidal said, a little bit more boring. But this is where we need to think how we fit in this context, and what is the profile that we need for our colleagues, for our future colleagues. Thank you.